Hello everyone and welcome back to the ACT Annual Conference. I'm James Winterton, an Associate Director for Policy and Technical at the ACT. And it's my pleasure to facilitate this next session presented by S&P Global Ratings on the long view, a view from a ratings agency on the role of ESG in corporate ratings over the long term. This session neatly brings together the key themes of this year's conference, balancing risk and championing sustainable growth. In ESG sessions earlier in the week, which are available to you as recorded, we've heard from representatives of investors, banks, corporate treasurers on the accelerating importance of ESG factors, environmental, social, and governance. The ESG landscape is evolving with a rapid expansion of reporting frameworks focused on ESG footprint and related risks. A common question arising from corporate treasurers that we talk to is, what is the role here of the ratings agencies? How do the ratings agencies evaluate ESG ratings? What inputs are the rating agencies seeking from businesses? And what is the role of ESG in corporate ratings over the longer term? So over the next 45 minutes, we'll be exploring some of these themes and welcoming your questions. And for questions, you'll see a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen that allows you to submit questions to the panel. We won't mention your name, and we'll try to tackle the questions as we go along. So please don't wait until the end to send them in. And alongside the Q&A button is a polls button where you will see our polling questions shortly. We'll be conducting 2 audience polls during this webinar, so please do take part when invited. The session's being recorded and will be available to delegates for 30 days. And I also encourage you to download the S&P slide pack found under resources. I'll ask both of our speakers from S&P to say a bit more about themselves in due course, but let me briefly introduce them to you now. Our first speaker will be Michael Wilkins, a Managing Director and Head of Sustainable Finance Analytics and Research at S&P Global Ratings based in London. Mike will set the scene by describing how S&P approaches ESG. Next, Florence Devevey will take us deeper into the ESG rating methodology. Florence is a Director and Head of Steering in the Sustainable Finance team at S&P Global Ratings. We'll then turn back to Mike to discuss the impact of COVID-19 on ESG ratings before concluding with your remaining questions and answers. Before I hand over to Mike, we're going to start with our first poll. So as I mentioned, if you click the polling button that you find at the bottom of your screen, you'll find the first polling question, which is, what is the key driver for corporates focusing on ESG? Please choose one answer from public relations, financial performance, investor demand, cost of capital, or all of the above. And Mike, while everyone's voting, would you like to start by saying a few words, please, about your global responsibility for S&P Ratings sustainable finance analytical activities? Mike, over to you.
Sure. Thanks very much, James, for that kind introduction, and good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Wilkins. I head up analytics and research for the sustainable finance team at S&P Global Ratings. My role is essentially to oversee how we integrate research and analytics into the credit rating process, provide assistance and guidance to the team of credit analysts that we have across the globe, and also to oversee the new products in the sustainable finance area, which we have been developing over the past few years. And I'll say a bit more about that in a few minutes. So what we're going to talk about today, as we're waiting for the polling questions to come back, to get the answers back, is how we integrate ESG into our credit analysis, and that's something which Florence will go into in quite a bit of depth. In terms of what are the material factors, what actually impacts creditworthiness, and how we actually articulate that and communicate that in our rating reports. Secondly, I'm going to be talking about the impact of COVID-19 and the pandemic on our credit ratings, because essentially we view the pandemic as having a social impact on credit, and I'll go back into that in more detail in a few minutes. And thirdly, the other thing that we're going to leave you with is a deeper dive into what actually do we mean by social factors as a credit issue, using COVID as an example, but also showing how governance has also crept up as a major factor in credit ratings. So it's not just about the environmental, it's also about the social and the governance. So on that, I'm wondering, James, are we now in a position to see what responses we got to the first polling question?
So I can see the results are just coming through on my screen, and the audience should be able to see. So the question was, what is the key driver for corporates focusing on ESG? And we have public relations 20%, financial performance 0%, investor demand 27%, cost of capital 0%, all of the above 50%. So Mike, is that what you were expecting to see perhaps?
In some ways, yes. In other ways, no. I suppose if you take into account all of the above, I suppose you can, at 50%, it means that there's quite a broad spread between those different factors. I would have said financial performance would have been a much higher rate of response. And that's one of the things that we've been looking at in terms of our research, in terms of the linkage between good ESG performance and good financial performance or improved financial performance. So, if we take the fact that 50% of respondents included all of them, then I suppose that's okay, but I would have expected a higher proportion to focus on financial performance. So maybe there's still some way to go to demonstrate the linkages between ESG and good financial or improved financial performance within corporates. But let me move on to the presentation in terms of what we do at S&P Global Ratings in terms of integrating ESG into our products and services. I'll just briefly introduce this. So both Florence and I are members of the Sustainable Finance team, as you can see in the sort of top middle of this slide in front of you. So we're a team comprising 38 or so members in the analytical practices. And so within our team, we have specialists or experts, as we like to call them, in all areas of ESG. We're based in London, Paris, New York, San Francisco, Singapore, and Mexico City. So we've got a broad range, and also we're continuing to grow the team. We've actually doubled in size over the past year, which actually is a testament to the interest there is within the credit ratings world in this topic. And one thing that we do, we're a specialized team, but we also interact with all the other practices within S&P Global Ratings. So our corporate ratings and infrastructure, sovereign and international public finance, the financial services team, which includes banks and insurance, as well as structured finance. All those are the main practices within S&P Global Ratings, and we work with all of them in terms of integrating ESG into their analysis. But the other main things that we do, you see at the bottom half of this slide, is that we have developed new products in the ESG space, which are separate to the credit rating. So within credit rating, we already have been incorporating ESG into the analysis for a number of years, and we've been increasing how we communicate on those factors and how we make that far more transparent, and that's a regulatory requirement of us and all rating agencies now. So that's, I would say, a top priority for us, so ESG and credit ratings. But we also have branched out, if you excuse the pun, into developing new products in the green space. For example, the Green Evaluation, which we launched 3 years ago, which is a score on the contribution that a financial instrument is making to improving the environment, whether it's through reducing carbon emissions or improving pollution control or energy efficiency or water quality. All those are environmental issues which are captured in our Green Evaluation approach. And also we have more recently developed another new product called the ESG Evaluation, which is a score on an entity itself, which focuses on the profile and the long-term preparedness of the entity to face disruption to its business model within the realm of sustainability. So those two new products, those ESG evaluation and green evaluation, are a major part of what we do in sustainable finance. And in addition to helping the credit analysts integrate ESG into the credit rating. So to help us do that, we have within the S&P Global family a number of sister companies which are very influential and essential to adding to the data and the analytics that we need to be able to integrate ESG into credit analysis, but also to develop these new products. So within S&P Global Market Intelligence, for example, there is a division called TrueCost, who are a specialist ESG analysis firm who have been operating in this space for 15 years or over. They're based in the UK, and they are now part of S&P Global and provide us with data and analytics for the new products that we're producing, and also with enhanced data sets, for example, looking at physical climate risk impact on credit analysis. So that access to those new data points are very important for us to be able to improve the quality of what we're doing in credit ratings, as well as develop these new products. We also have other divisions which are focused on ESG. For example, Platts do a lot of work on scenario analysis. And we also have S&P Dow Jones indices, which are looking at or already provide a number of specialized indices which are tailored to ESG, for example, carbon efficient indices, and those which are basically allowing for ESG to be weighted in to make it more relevant to how allocation of capital are in those specific funds. So those are a broad range of what we do within S&P Global. And the most recent addition to the family is SAM, formerly part of Robeco SAM. And SAM is the ESG ratings provider for formerly Robeco SAM, and conducts what is known as the Corporate Sustainability Assessment, or CSA, which is now part of what we do and included in our ESG evaluation. So we have access to over 3,700 corporate ESG data sets through SAM, which we now are able to include in what we do. So just before I hand over back to James for the next polling question and allow Florence to continue, just to highlight the ESG evaluation output. I mentioned this as one of the products that we do. This is one we did on Unilever, which is renowned for its focus on ESG. And you can see this looks very different to a credit rating. We don't use letter grades, we use a score out of 100. So in this case, Unilever got a score of 89 out of 100, which is very high. And also we're trying to show the split of that score between the profile, which in this case was 75 out of 100, again disaggregated between the ES and G components, and the profile reflects the observable performance of this company in terms of all three factors. And then we have what's known as the preparedness. So that is the second section, which looks into the future, 15 years out, in terms of how the company's strategy is shaped to take into account future disruption. And we split that into various components such as awareness, assessment, action, and culture, and decision making, and score them individually to come up with, in this case, best in class. So the combination of the profile and the preparedness actually gives you the final score. So anyway, I'm not going to go into more detail on this now, because within the resources section, you've got the full Unilever report, so you can go into it. You can see what we're doing in that space. But just to emphasize, the ESG evaluation is a score separate to the credit rating, and I'll come back to it later in the presentation to describe how we actually look at different issues related to social factors from a credit and an ESG evaluation perspective. So on that, James, I'll hand back to you, and so you can actually go through the next polling question.
Great, thanks, Mike, for that overview. And before I bring in Florence, indeed, let's hold our second poll. And again, the poll button is at the bottom of your screen. And this time, the question is, to what extent has ESG become a treasury consideration? And I think here, by the way, we're talking specifically about treasury, not the business as a whole. So please choose one from not at all, to some extent, moderately, to a large extent, or overwhelmingly. And I'm glad to see we've already got some questions coming through on the Q&A. And one comment on the last poll that came in was someone commenting, actually, they thought it was quite a good result to see the 50% going for all of the above, because the trends that we've seen this week during the conference, the people talking about how ESG is becoming integrated as part of business practice. And so they found that an encouraging result. So great to have those perspectives coming in from the audience. Thank you for sharing. And while the audience is still voting, Florence, can you tell us briefly about yourself and your role as head of steering in the sustainable finance team?
Sure. Thank you, James. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Florence. I'm part of the sustainable finance team at S&P. I joined the team about a year ago as head of steering, meaning that I'm responsible for the consistent application of our ESG methodology across practices and regions. And prior to joining the sustainable finance team, I actually spent 15 years in the corporate rating practices, looking at corporate ratings in different sectors, both in high yield and investment grade, and in different regions. Maybe while we are waiting for the answers from the poll, I can answer one question that I saw, which was around the green evaluation and whether it was on individual bonds rather than entities. So yes, green evaluation is on financial instruments, can be bonds or loan, and not on the entity. On the entity, that's the ESG evaluation product that Mike talked about. The green evaluation is at the instrument level.
And Florence, perhaps just also while we're waiting for the poll results to come on our screens, there was also a question about what's your view on unsolicited ratings, which I thought was quite an interesting question. So perhaps you can give some indication as to how many of the ratings do you do solicited and how many unsolicited. Some feel for that, please.
Sure. Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but we do solicited ratings. And that works for credit ratings, ESG evaluation, and green evaluation. Sorry, Mike, I hand over to you.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. We don't do unsolicited rating. We only do them on request. That's the same policy as we apply for credit ratings. And we also apply that to our evaluation products as well.
Great. And the poll results have actually come in. So the question was, to what extent has ESG become a treasury consideration? So 32% said moderately, to some extent scored 23%, overwhelmingly 18%, to a large extent 18%, and not at all 9%. So Florence, again, you might want to comment on that before leading into your presentation.
Sure. Well, I hope that the 9% that think it's not relevant will maybe change their mind after the presentation, or happy to take questions also afterwards to see in case they haven't changed their mind. Okay, so I'm going to specifically focus on ESG in credit ratings. So as Mike explained, there are 3 different legs to what we do in sustainable finance: ESG in credit ratings, ESG evaluations, and green evaluation. So I will focus on the first one, which is the ESG in credit ratings. So on that first slide, if you remember one thing, that would be the one indicated on the first bullet point. We incorporate ESG factors in our credit analysis when they are material and relevant to the creditworthiness of the entity. So if it's not material or not relevant, we don't incorporate it in our credit ratings. I think that's the key message here. When these factors are relevant and material, they can influence the rating level itself, they can influence the outlook, or they can influence the headroom that there is at a particular rating level. As many other factors that we include in our credit analysis, the ESG factors, their influence can vary over time as they become more or less material. So we'll monitor them as we monitor other factors that we include in our credit analysis. And just something I wanted to highlight. So first of all, our ratings do not have a time limit or a time horizon, and same goes for the ESG factors that we incorporate in our credit analysis. And second, there is no direct link between the ESG credentials and the creditworthiness of a company. So you can have a company with strong ESG credentials that doesn't have a strong creditworthiness, but you can also have a strong ESG credential with strong creditworthiness. To give you an example, you can have a company that's very well advanced in its sustainability and that has strong ESG credentials, but if that company has issues with its liquidity and imminent liquidity issues, then the creditworthiness of this company will be pretty low despite strong ESG credentials. So there's no, the two are complementary, but there's no linear link between the two. So where do we incorporate these ESG factors in our analysis? So here you'll see the answer is it's a bit everywhere. We do not have a specific bucket to incorporate all of the ESG factors, but rather we incorporate the ESG factors at various steps in our analysis. As I believe most of you are familiar with that chart and rendering construction. So we have two building blocks at the beginning, the business risk profile and the financial risk profile, which we combine into an anchor that is then modified by a series of modifiers before we get to the final rating. So in the first building block of business risk profile, we incorporate ESG factors either at the industry level or at the entity level, where we look at the competitive advantage of a company. So for example, if the industry we're looking at is the coal industry, then of course we will have a high risk on this industry. At the entity level, again, if we take another example, if we take a company that operates in auto, then a company that's more advanced in its electric vehicle is likely to have, among other factors, that will influence the way we view the company's competitive advantage. So that's two examples of where it could be incorporated in our business risk profile. In the financial risk profile, so it's where we actually capture any potential impact of the ESG in our forecast. So it can be in our forecast of the sales and profit, or for example, if there was potential fines due to the company not respecting ESG regulations. Again, I think we can take the auto example. Then we would put that in our financial forecast, and that would influence our projections of financial metrics. And then later on, you see another yellow arrow next to the bucket of management and governance. So within the list of modifiers that we have, one is dedicated to management and governance. So we would capture here any positive, but most likely negatives, linked to a governance of a company. So just to summarize, the message here is that we don't have a dedicated place for ESG, but rather we factor in the ESG factors at different level in our analysis. So I've been talking about these ESG factors, but I just want to make sure everybody understands what I was actually talking about. So we've put here a list of E factors, S factors, and G factors. The list is not exhaustive. As you can see, there's a other bucket for each category. But in the E factors, to give you a few examples, I think you wouldn't be surprised to see that we capture their natural conditions. We capture their factors related to greenhouse gas emission and pollution, and any other factors like linked to waste or water would be captured under other. For S factor, we capture factors related to human capital management, but also health and safety. We will give you a few examples in particular related to COVID, and other factors related to customer or other social factors. And for governance, it's related to the execution of the strategy, the internal controls, the risk management of the company, and the transparency and reporting. So a few examples of rating actions that had been impacted by E, S, and G factors. So started with E, we have the example here of PG&E, so a utility company that operates in California. And as you can see here, there is a revision of the outlook linked to the increased wildfires in California that could ultimately impact the company's performance. It was quite a recent one, so we actually tagged the credit rating action to the E factor of natural conditions. An example on the S factor, so here we have the example of a cruise line operator, Carnival, which actually had a 3 notches a downgrade and a career watch negative. Here the main ESG issue that we saw was related to health and safety, which we view as a social factor. So due to the social distancing measures that need to be implemented for the health and safety of the passengers, then the ships will be able to welcome less passengers, meaning that the sales and ultimately the profit and the cash flow of the company will be impacted by the reduced number of passengers allowed on the ships. And a final example on the G part this time. So here it's kind of a complex example because it's a combination of our group rating methodology and a governance issue. But basically here we have an example of a parent company which had some issues in executing its strategy. So we view that as a G factor. And as a result, the parent company we found that it was less in a position to support financially one of its subsidiaries. So we assume less financial support from the parent to the entity, and that eventually had an impact on the subsidiary itself and the ratings. And finally, I'll explain to you what we have been publishing over the past couple of years to enhance transparency around how we incorporate ESG factors in our credit ratings. So one key initiative was the publication of what we call ESG report cards. So we publish report cards for every sector that we cover in corporate ratings, but also in other practices. So in corporate ratings, you have around 30 ESG report cards that we have published. They are divided by industry, so we're covering midstream, retail, real estate, regulated utilities, auto, telecom, you name it. In those reports, we highlight the key ESG issue that we think are relevant for companies operating in that sector. And for the biggest names in that sector, we actually also give a detailed paragraph on how ESG factors are incorporated into the corporate ratings of these companies. The last report card were published earlier this year. It's the second time they've been published, and we will continue to refresh them as the ESG risks and their influence changes over time. And on that note, I will hand over back to Mike.
Yeah, so it's James here. Florence, I just want to say thank you for that, because brilliantly your talks actually picked up on a number of the sort of technical questions coming into us. And I would say to everyone, keep the questions coming in. So one question, very timely, it's literally just popped up on my screen. It says, as a black swan event, how has COVID-19 affected how you view or weight your ESG factors? So Mike, that's a brilliant segue back to you to talk to us, please, a bit about the impact of COVID-19 on ESG ratings. Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, James. And what I'd like to do is, first of all, just to focus a little bit more on that topic. So that question is actually very timely in terms of how we view COVID-19 on ESG in general, but also in the context of both the rating and the ESG evaluation. As I said in my introduction, the two are separate products. So if we start off with, generally how COVID-19 is viewed by S&P Global Ratings, we've classified it as a health and safety related social factor, which I suppose is a fairly obvious thing to say. So we look at it from the point of view of its impact on a company's operations, for example, in terms of the workforce, absenteeism, workdays lost, and fatalities, which is a very direct impact, the operational side, as well as the more generic side in terms of the impact it will have on, sorry, I'm just trying to, yes, right, let's get to the right slide. Yeah, in reputational impact, it has been putting external stakeholders at risk. So we're looking at this from a multidimensional perspective, both from the workforce, the operational disruptions, and reputational impacts combined. So when we actually look at the impact it has on the credit rating, we split it into two parts. There's the direct ESG impact versus the non-ESG or indirect impact. So when we look at social factors impacting the credit rating related to the pandemic, and we view those as being direct, they will have a impact related to health and safety concerns. And the classic example are airlines or leisure, retail, where you see that due to social distancing measures or other types of concerns which have imposed barriers to sales to customers and provision of services, those are going to lead to a direct impact on profitability, cash flow, and hence credit quality. So really that's what we see as the direct impact. The indirect, on the other side, is when it's related to the broader economic consequences of the pandemic. So, if you see a decline in sort of sales of oil and gas products or general goods related to recessionary type situations, those are indirect. They may be a consequence of the pandemic, but they actually haven't been directly a consequence of the health and safety measures. So those are indirect. And it's really the direct ones which have actually been incorporated as social factors in the rating. So, I mention this important because as of late, we've had to be very explicit in how we tag our credit rating actions related to ESG. This is a new regulation that's come in through the European Securities and Markets Authority, or ESMA, which regulates all credit rating agencies. So whenever there is a rating change, which is directly a consequence of an ESG credit factor, and they're listed here on the slide again, we have to actually say what that factor is in the report, and we have to provide a link to the relevant part of our methodology to show how we've changed the rating. So every time that a rating has changed over the past few months due to a social factor related to the pandemic, that's actually been made explicit in the report. And as I said, that's the number of cases where that's happened has actually been quite significant. As you can see on this slide here, since from the period April to August, we've had close to 2,000 actions related to ESG. and just over 700 downgrades have actually been actioned related to the pandemic in connection to the ESG social credit factor. And as I mentioned, those are the direct ones where we've seen, for example, airlines and airports and public transport and so on, leisure and retail and restaurants, all those have been directly impacted by health and safety measures implemented, leading to worsening credit conditions for those entities. And the word ESG Pulse, as you can see here and on the previous slide, relates to a monthly publication where we list all of these rating actions related to ESG, give examples, and provide you with all the statistics and data so you can actually see which sectors have been the worst impacted and which one, and some case studies to actually go into some detail. And those are provided in the resources pack as well for this presentation. So you can see the last two editions of the ESG Pulse, and the one for September is about to be released in the next 24 hours. So let me just move on in the interest of time, because I know we want to leave some time for questions. These are a couple of examples of governance-related rating actions, which just to highlight that it's not just E and it's not just S, which leads to credit downgrades or rating actions in general. Here you see a credit watch negative on First Energy Corp because of its potential implications of a bribery case. And secondly, Macy's, a big department store in the US, which was downgraded to B+ due to governance issues. And this is not just because of the pandemic, bringing this as an issue for that particular credit, but also because of the changes in the turnover of the company and the management of the company, which has raised management concerns for us and how its governance has been treated. So we actually changed the governance assessment from satisfactory to fair. So that's basically a lowering of the score, and that's actually led to a change in the rating. So there you can see how the governance has had a direct impact on the rating itself. So I wanted to leave time for questions, James. I know we've got around 7.5 minutes left of this session. So do you want to maybe field a few of them so that we can take them?
That's great, Mike. Well, first, thank you very much for your comments on COVID. And what I'll try to do is group some of the questions, actually. And there's a number of questions that are relating to the standardization of rating methodologies, or posed the other way, the lack of standardization around rating metrics. And in parallel to that theme, there's also a question about how do you ensure the robustness of the data that's being given to you, to ensure that it's not overly subjective or perhaps slanted. So if I could first turn to Florence, please, to talk about on rating methodologies. Do you think we're seeing a divergence of methodologies and metrics at the moment, or will we actually be seeing a convergence?
For the ESG methodology, there actually exist, quite a few providers. I saw an earlier comment that I think it's different to credit ratings, where there seems to be more convergence and alignment between the different providers. There's, for example, if you take a company that's rated by S&P and by one of our competitors, there's usually not a significant difference in the outcome. I think it's different for the ESG ratings because the market is less mature. There are more players that have different methodologies. So indeed, I think there's more disparities in the outcome. Maybe just answering a few other questions, especially one that I saw twice. So at the moment, we have publicly available 10 ESG evaluations. One of them is Unilever that Mike presented. We released an article in June that explained that we had actually done a lot, many more, but we have quite a high number of ESG evaluations that remain confidential for the moment. And of course, we also have an even larger number of ESG evaluations that we're working on and that are in the pipeline. Maybe on the standardization and the metrics, I'm happy to talk about that. So indeed, the ESG metrics sometimes are not certified, they're not standardized. So it's again, it's less mature than in financial metrics and financial reporting. So the way we go about it is, so first of all, when we work on a ESG evaluation, it's a joint work between sustainable finance and the team that knows the sector very well on the corporate rating side. So by working together, we're able to actually analyze these ESG data qualitatively. So to give you an example, if there's a metric from a company that operates in oil and gas that seems off, then usually the sector team, because of their sector knowledge, will actually see that something is unusual and needs to be further analyzed qualitatively, because in the context of the industry, that particular metrics may not make a lot of sense. So I think it's very important to understand that we work in partnership with the analyst that deeply knows the sector that we're looking at. And then second, as Mike mentioned, through the acquisition of SAM from RobecoSAM, we have actually access to 20 years of ESG data. So that also helps us understand the context, and we analyzed all of this data also qualitatively, thanks to the trend that we can see, all the data that we have on the peers, and by doing this qualitative analysis of the quantitative data, then I think it really helps us having a good understanding of where a company is on its ESG journey. It is a challenge because indeed we have to do a lot of qualitative analysis of this data, but between the sector knowledge and a lot of historical data that we have, we think we're in a position to have a quite robust analysis of this data.
Okay, so thank you. So it's like another robustness point as well. But Mike, do you want to come in on the robustness point? But also, Mike, perhaps you could just very briefly, because we're now getting short on time, just picking up on the second poll we had. Can you just, there's some questions about what are the key challenges in integrating ESG into finance decisions, particularly for corporate treasurers. So if you could please also pick up on that point briefly.
Sure, James. Yeah, and I've also been tracking some of the questions which are related to does it have an impact on cost of capital, and these are all very good questions, ones that we're asked a lot, and we've obviously been researching into these topics very much as well. Clearly, treasurers are focused on the cost of capital and where and how to access the debt markets, and whether ESG is going to be a help or a hindrance in that respect is clearly a big issue. What we've noticed over the years is that companies that do take ESG into consideration and actually are transparent in their policies around ESG, they communicate and they also implement these policies and show a good track record. Generally, those companies are the ones that perform better. We published a report last year about ESG performance and the linkages with corporate performance, if you want to go into that topic in more depth. And generally, we see those that have good ESG track record are the ones that tend to be more resilient. And this is something which we very much focus on in the ESG evaluation. That's why we have this preparedness section, which looks out over 50 years. 15 years. 50 years perhaps of climate change, being a long-term issue. But we factor in, how a board of a company is looking at long-term disruptive risks and how it's adapting to these risks or not, as the case may be. And those type of long-term views, which go beyond the sort of 5-year forecast, typically that are viewed within the sort of financial analysis perspective, those long-term views are really so important because it shows how robust the company is, how robust its business model is, and essentially how likely it is to survive in the face of big disruptions, including pandemics and the impacts of climate change.
Mike, that's fantastic, and thank you for bringing us back onto track for the long view of ESG. Well, we're just about out of time now, but we've heard great insights from Mike and Florence on the role of ESG in corporate ratings. Thank you to those of you who contributed questions. Could I please ask everyone to fill in the quick survey where there's a survey button at the bottom of your screen next to the Q&A button. We really do appreciate your feedback. And of course, please do visit the exhibition hall for the conference. Don't forget the closing keynote speech at 3:30 p.m. today. And finally, on behalf of the audience, I'd like to thank S&P Ratings and our excellent speakers, Mike Wilkins, Florence Devevey. This has been James Winterton for the ACT. Thank you and goodbye.